education. As some of you, if not everyone, might have heard, when JAMB released the latest result, the registrar, Professor Dipo Ojerinde, did say that only 3 out of, okay, perhaps let's get to hear from him directly so that you put it in proper context. Let's take a look.
The 2012 UTME has recorded the highest number of candidates so far, with over 1.5 million candidates. But over 28,000 results may be released or cancelled. Registrar of the Joint Admissions and Matriculations Board, Professor Dipo Ojerinde, said the board has vowed to deal decisively with all the 52 centres reported to have compromised during the examinations.
They spread across a number of states. Abia has 2 centres, Benue 3 centres, Cross River 2 centres, Delta 3 centres, Imo 6 centres, Lagos 11 centres, Nasarawa 1 centre, and the mother of them all, Rivers State 24 centres.
The registrar said the results have been more unfavorable compared with last year, but there has been a drastic reduction in examination malpractice and only over 5,000 results declared invalid. However, only 3 candidates scored 300 and above. The JAMB boss pointed out that more students gave higher preference to universities in spite of their low carrying capacities.
How many candidates scored below 170? 336,330 candidates scored below 170. How many candidates do we have between 250 and above? Greater than or equal to 250 is about 72,243, which is quite reasonable, but it's not as good as it was last year.
Although there were no cases of security threat, according to the professor, some candidates from Lagos have been apprehended by the police for trying to cheat using a mobile phone sewn into their pair of slippers.
This is one. This belongs to a candidate whose registration number is 26263616CB. He was caught.
The registrar says the solution to examination malpractice is e-testing, an online testing method with instant results. JAMB has therefore promised to introduce this method to bring sanity into the system.
Well, it was Horace Mann who said a human being is not attaining his full heights until he is educated. And so arresting the falling standards of education in the country is what we're focusing on this time. I'm joined by Dr. Austin Tam George, who is a lecturer in Pan-African University. He's a former lecturer in University of Cape Town and is the Executive Director, Institute of Communication and Corporate Studies. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thanks for having me.
What does the Institute specialize in?
The Institute basically specializes in training manpower in Nigeria, because we realize that the quality of education in Nigeria has fallen and the quality of graduates that we are getting are not industry ready. And so what we find is that there is a direct connection between the poor quality of education and the poor manpower quality we have in Nigeria. So since we can't send workers back to the university, what we do basically is to train, build the capacity of workers in industry and make them become more effective in the workplace.
Before they start working now, let's look at what we just saw on television now. The same Professor Ojerinde did say 1.5 million candidates took this particular JAMB examinations, and just 3 candidates actually scored 300 and above %. Is that a plus for us?
We are in a crisis, you see, but I think that we missed our path from the 70s, where we started placing more emphasis on schooling rather than education. Now, as we know, there's a fundamental distinction between simply going to school and obtaining a certificate and getting skills that are usable in real life. So this fundamental distinction between schooling and education is something we need to understand. Schooling is a graded consumption of knowledge. We meet in class from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock at social time for a specialist course, and then we get a certificate at the end of the program as an acknowledgement of our presence. But education is a totally different matter altogether. Education focuses on skills, capacity building, skills acquisition and character molding. So what we find is that rather than emphasize the importance of education, everybody seems to be interested in simply attending schools and obtaining certificate. And the consequence, of course, is that we get people who have all kinds of funny sounding degrees, and yet they can't function in the real world. So that's the kind of tragedy we face.
Well, it seems that what your training center has come up with is a stopgap measure. Do you have anything on the long term, to work with universities to make sure that what they churn out, or who they churn out, people that can fill in, or are factory or industry ready, as it were?
Yes, we have all kinds of partnerships with universities here in Nigeria and abroad. We draw some of our faculty from over 20 countries. So what we do basically is to make sure that, for instance, if you're a lawyer and you've been trained and you've been called to the bar, you soon realize that you need excellent communication skills to function. Before you form a legal opinion, you need to have critical thinking skills, and these are skills that you don't find in the official legal curriculum. So what we do basically is to completely rebuild the capacity of professionals and workers in the industry in order that they can function more optimally and become better persons in the industry in which they work. So what we find basically a more traditional approach to education here in Nigeria is that people tend to be more interested in simply getting certificates. The universities are mostly short most of the time, so 6 months they are short. What kind of graduate would you expect from such a system? They have the certificate, but they can't function. So what we do basically is to go back to the workplace, because in the last analysis, those who come out of the university system or come out from all of these institutions will have to find work. And when they get to the workplace, they can't function, and that is where we come in. We try to build their capacity, partner with all kinds of universities, including, helping to design courses. Because what we found over the period is that some of the universities are not even responding to the needs of industry directly. Their curriculum, the curriculum designs do not have this kind of synchronicity.
Does this have anything to do with the foundation level? Because now we're getting to see people taking cell phones to classrooms or examination halls. Before you get to that level now where you now say, I'm out of school, I should be able to do stuff on my own. You get to see some fantastic CV and they say, I can work with minimum supervision. So you now leave this person and you thought that, he or she could perform well. So let's look at the foundation level now and see how prepared we've actually been.
We are not as prepared as we used to be in the 60s and in the early 50s. What we have these days, even in the private educational sector, is that principals and proprietors of schools tell parents up front that we operate UK curriculum we alongside American curriculum with Nigerian curriculum. So what you find is some kind of concoction, and the kind of skill sets you would expect kids to have when they come out of school, you don't have them. And because there's so much emphasis on certificates, it raises the desperation level of the students. They go into all kinds of things. They hire people to write exams for them. We don't have effective examination policing system, so they hire all kinds of people to write exams for them. They pass through JAMB as products of a very faulty system, and then when they get into the university, they use all kinds of methods to pass through the universities, because the emphasis appears to be to simply pass the exams.
Are you drawing the correlation of the concoction of curriculums?
Yeah.
Are you trying to draw a relationship with why people cheat?
Oh yes. No, well, you see, what we have is that when you design a curricula, in the university, it ought to have direct synchronicity with what happens in real life. The needs of the industry, the needs of society. So if there is a disjuncture between the curriculum design and the kind of reality we face every day in real life, the tendency is that people don't have skills that are usable in real life. That's one part. Now, when there is so much emphasis on certificates, the tendency is for people to become so desperate as to acquire the certificates at all costs. And that is why you see people resort to cell phones and all kinds of methods in order to pass the exams. They are not interested in getting skills, because society is not interested in skills, apparently. What they are interested in is just to get the certificates, and the certificates, once you get them, become something like meal tickets. And one thing that is also very fundamental in this whole process is that when you get a certificate, you don't not only have skills, you don't have character as well. Which is why when you get to the workplace, people are basically incompetent. And we found it across the board, not just in industry, but even in the political sphere as well. The quality of leaders we have is a direct result of the kind of quality of education that we have.
That's another chapter, but we'll come to that in a moment. So, would you say then that if organizations, industries were to focus on the key skills or skills that individuals bring to the table when they come on, perhaps the focus would be a lot different when they get into schools?
Oh yes, look at one of the courses that we have. For instance, there has been all kinds of, talk about the restiveness in the communities in the Niger Delta. But until recently, there was not a single university in Nigeria that offers a course on how the companies themselves will relate with the communities in the area. So what we've done, is to design a course called Rethinking Community Relations in the Niger Delta. Okay, what this means is to basically build the capacity of executives and industry practitioners on how to deal with rural communities. What you find
strictly
is that,
for the Niger Delta.
Yes, strictly for the Niger Delta. We have generic courses, that deal with community relations, basically. Okay, but we also have tailored, customized courses that directly address the needs of the industry. You don't find this kind of thing very often in Nigerian universities. Okay, so what we do basically is to build, design courses that speak directly to the reality out there. So you find executives, all kinds of community relations practitioners attending our courses, and then they know better how to deal with the communities. It's an important, kind of disconnection that informs this kind of educational practice. A lot of these organizations, for instance, Shell, Chevron, Mobil, and the rest of them come from glittering cities, have their headquarters in glittering cities in New York, London, Brussels, and the rest. To function in rural communities in Nigeria, some of them living in very primitive conditions, can raise the specter of corporate arrogance. Yet, if you don't deal effectively with these communities, you can't function. So what we do basically, since you can't find this kind of courses in conventional university curriculum, is to design courses that basically address this kind of industry capacity gaps. So this is very important because you don't find them very easily in universities.
Okay, another aspect of this entire matter is the fact that the quality of the teachers themselves who teach the students. I mean, much as, yes, the curriculum needs to be reviewed, but in terms of the standard, the quality of those who are even teaching these young lads, it leaves a lot to be desired also.
Yes, because these teachers themselves are trained from the same system. They are trained by the same system. So what you find is that, look, in Finland, if you don't have the equivalent of a master's degree, you cannot even teach in a primary school. But here, just everybody can just, get into the class and teach. And there is no direct relationship between...
It's interesting again because, you've given the instance of Finland that has, that requires you to have a master's degree, which is another emphasis on certificate, if you like, rather than skills, so that you can be a very good teacher without getting a master's certificate.
Yes.
And, you can also have a master's certificate and not be a very, very good teacher. So how do we break the cycle of the requirement for having a certificate as opposed to having skills in our society?
The interesting example I just cited in Finland is not certificate based. There is a whole range of training that happens across the board over a certain stretch of time, over 6 years, for a person to qualify to even teach in a primary school. You see, so it's not so much an emphasis on certificates as much as the rigor of the process of teacher training itself. But what we find here is that because there is no proper recognition of teaching itself as a profession, it becomes an all-comers game. And anybody who goes into, say, a college of education is not even regarded in society as a qualitative personnel. So what you find is there is a whole range of things that we need to put in place, not just emphasizing certificates, but recognizing the importance of education.
Is that the same as education for self-reliance?
Yes, education not only for self-reliance, but for the betterment of society. Because in the last analysis, an educated person must bring a certain skill for the betterment of not only himself, because he himself or the lady herself will have to function within a larger context. So ultimately, education emphasizes better society. With people of skill, bringing their skills to the table.
Now you're bringing it to a broader perspective now. We'll talk about society, what we see on a daily basis. For instance, well, the inadequacies we get to see in some sectors of our national life, or even individuals who are supposed to man such agencies or bodies? Is it also as a result of the kind of education they have had over time?
If you have education, there's a key component I mentioned earlier in the course of our discussion concerning character formation. Schooling, which emphasizes certification, doesn't emphasize that. Education cannot, a properly educated person cannot afford to be corrupt, because education emphasizes honesty and integrity and delayed gratification. Okay, because when you work, you know that in the course of time you will have, legitimate reward for your work. But if you emphasize schooling, you see the certificate basically as a source of livelihood, as a meal ticket. And my suspicion is that will lead you into all kinds of instant gratification activities, such as corruption and the rest of them. So what you find is that individuals who have all kinds of degrees, function as heads of departments, they are heads of institutions, but what they really need to do is to form their character, and schooling as a simple process doesn't guarantee that. Only education will guarantee skill acquisition and proper character formation.
Where would you lay the emphasis for that character formation? At what level would you say is the most critical to have, character formation emphasized?
At the family level, because sociologically speaking, the family is the smallest and the first, center of socialization. So the parents as parents, we all have responsibility to form the character of the child. But you see, as the child grows up, it goes into kindergarten, the social cycle widens, and so a new set of responsibilities are assigned to a new set of individuals, namely the teachers and minders. So this is something that actually starts from the family as the smallest but most vital center of socialization and character formation across the board, from kindergarten to primary to the university. Where the problem arises here is that by the time they get into the university, or by the time they get into the primary school, all kinds of emphasis, overtakes character formation, and there's a lot of emphasis on certification. That's where the problem lies.
Okay, we've got some questions coming through for you. This one comes in from Jude. He wants to know, why is it that Nigerians are the best students in US and other countries, but here the reverse seems to be the case? What could be responsible for this?
Well, one of the reasons is that you have some of the best facilities, abroad. I, for one, have some of my best opportunities in life studying abroad. Okay, you could have very good students in Nigeria if we have. Nigerians are naturally hardworking people. Okay, but when you don't have facilities, when the universities are short most of the time, the tendency is for people to become distracted and perform less than optimally. But when you go abroad, when you go outside of outside of this system to, say, countries abroad, you not only have guarantees that the university system will not be disrupted, you actually learn in a climate that encourages skill acquisition and proper education. So that is why Nigerians, once they step abroad, tend to do far better than their counterparts back at home because of the constraints we have here.
Tell us about the function of research in this matter, because in other climes, research almost on anything is regular. It comes out every now and then. But here, about social issues, we don't see the benefit of research. So could that be the reason why the political class may say, well, if they're not even coming up with studies and findings that we can correct ourselves on, we assume we're right, and then we keep going?
Well, research is a key aspect of education. You research in order to find information, to find better solutions to problems. Now, when you're distracted, you can't possibly do research, because by its very nature, research is very rigorous. Okay, now when the university is shut for the better part of the year, 6 months, 7 months, nobody can possibly do research in such circumstances. When salaries are not paid for 4, 5, 6 months because of a strike, no research can happen, which is why our university system can't function except there is not only good funding but complete independence of the university system. Because what we find these days is that the universities are seen more or less as centers of opposition by politicians, and they think that the first thing they can do is to shut down the university anytime they see or they hear voices of dissent coming from those centers of learning. So the more and more disruptions you have in the educational system, the less are the inclination to conduct research.
In the same Finland, if I remember properly, political office holders, I think cabinet members, are required to go to a night school no matter the level or your experience in politics, you have to go to a nice school to learn certain things because they have a unique system of governance. If that were to be the case here, would they help and change anything?
Well, you see, the emphasis again is not so much what time of class you attend, whether it's in the night or whether it's... The most important thing is character formation. You see, here, what we do is to give so much emphasis to, the number, for instance, of universities we have. Every now and then, almost every year, new universities are permitted. Look, it's not so much the number of universities you have in your country as much as the quality of education that the people get. In Singapore, they have only 2 national universities, but these 2 national universities are listed among the best 100 in the world. But here, you know the story. I mean, we have all kinds of universities churned out almost every year. Private universities are all over the place, all kinds of public universities, and yet we are not listed in any respectable sense in the Committee of Universities in the world. You see, so I think that there has to be a completely different mindset concerning education, the importance of character formation, and the place of the university in the advancement of society.
It's very interesting. When people talk about education, especially people who are much older than my father, or maybe around his age group, they're always talking about how the quality of education in those days, was very good. What you also find is that, we also complain about the quality of leadership, and you've said that it is closely linked with it. What we found is that over the years, even those who are still in leadership positions are those who have attended schools in those days. So how come the quality of education that was good in those days is not exactly reflecting in the quality of leadership that we have now?
Well, you see, leadership itself is something that is in a continuum. Whatever position you find yourself in, you need all kinds of institutional systems to check excesses. And so you might have good intentions, but if the systems to check you are weak, you find that your good intentions can only take you as far. So what we find is, in spite of poor leadership, is also institutional meltdown, institutional weaknesses. So a person might be tempted to become corrupt if he knows that the systems for punishment are weak. So you see that once the systems are weak, the judicial system is weak, the policing system is weak, the tendency is for people to say, okay, maybe if I do this, I'm likely to get away with it. So there is a strong connection between poor leadership and institutional weaknesses. I'll give you an example. Since 2000, the year 2000, this is 2012 now, since 2000, Japan has had 9 prime ministers. If there is a suspicion in Japan that the prime minister might be weak or doesn't have focus, he's out. Okay? So you find that they constantly upgrade their standards. They're constantly holding their leaders to account, because for them, meritocracy, the importance of merit, the importance of skill in public administration is very important. So for 12 years, they've had 9 prime ministers. We don't have that sense of holding people to account in Nigeria. Well, we still have very primordial, choices to make when we get to the polling station. Our interest is not so much the quality of leadership we are going to put in place. Rather, we are more interested in the regional balancing that we need to do in choosing our leaders. So when you choose leaders as a result of, as a consequence of where they come from, or whether they are in the same church with you, when you have all this kind of primordial, almost primitive conditions in choosing leaders, the kind of leadership you have is the kind of leadership you choose.
So this is the kind of...
sorry, Michael, let's just say, okay, maybe if the system is truly not worth what the student can get, how can a student individually help himself or herself to really better and develop yourself so that you can actually stand out?
This is an interesting question. Much of personal advancement depends not so much on what the teacher does in class. Actually, what a teacher can do is to start an intellectual fire, to spark, to introduce a spark. It's up to the student to turn this spark into a conflagration, or to allow it to die as ashes. So every student has a responsibility to develop himself or herself. So, but where the rub is you might not have the capacity to improve yourself, and that is why we need systems. Barack Obama didn't start out in some of the best, richest families, but there are all kinds of support systems to make sure that if you're brilliant and you show some promise, you have a guarantee to have a best shot at life. But we don't have those kind of support systems here in Nigeria. If you're poor, you attend one of the worst public schools where the teachers don't show up 2 weeks on end. So the tendency is that the poorer you are, the less likelihood that the child will do well at school. So these are things we need to understand, because there are all kinds of things, including support systems, that need to come in to make sure that people build their capacity to improve themselves.
Well, we certainly do have a challenge on our hands, but what kinds of first steps can we take to be seen to correct some of these anomalies?
First of all, there has to be a renewed commitment to education, not just certification. People must understand that what society needs is not a range of certificates. What we need are skills, especially now in the 21st century. If we want to win the future, it can only be through people of skill. People must emphasize, all our systems, whether private universities or public universities, must emphasize skills acquisition. That is, you can only get certificates only when it has been proven that you really know what you're doing. If you study law, for instance, it shouldn't be enough simply to be called to the bar. You need to have all kinds of practical sessions, go to court. They do moot courts and stuff like that, but what's the quantity? We need to increase the level of practical learning.
Does industrial training help?
Industrial training helps, you see, but it is only one part of the spectrum. There are all kinds of, this is a systemic crisis we have. So industrial training will help, but then it has to start from the cradle. There has to be a strong, commitment to education right from the family level across the board up to the workplace, and that is where the institute, such as mine, comes in. We make sure that we train people, to not emphasize certificates, but to build their capacity to function, not just as individuals, but as groups.
So, Chamberlain, a quick one. That means it's not really right for us to send core members as teachers into some secondary schools.
Well, if
they just got posted now.
Well, if you send a core member to school, it's not enough. The core member has to be trained to be a teacher. It's not enough simply to send an individual. We need to elaborate our curriculum in such a way that even if you're studying chemistry, you need teaching skills. Even if you're studying gas engineering, you need teaching skills. Even if you're studying medicine, you need teaching skills. So that if you go out to function, you are basically an all-rounded person, which is what education is. You ought to be able to comment, on politics, even if you're a graduate of chemistry. You're not lost in your molecular universe. You're basically rounded enough to function in society as an educated person.